This session will be about powering up pedagogy. It's going to be a bit of a 20-minute masterclass in what that means for all of us and how we can all take action, why it makes such a huge difference to young people's lives. Now, in 2022, and you might well already be aware of this, the global spend on EdTech amounted to about $6.5 trillion worldwide. That's about 5% of the entire global education spend. That is massive, isn't it? And that spend, that education budget, should be making an equally massive difference to the lives of the young people that we are all here to support. So before I go any further, I just want to give a big shout out to all the technicians, the IT specialists, the digital champions, the EdTech pioneers in this room. Your hard work is the reason we're able to use that digital technology to improve the lives of students and educators. So a huge, huge thank you. And every day, colleagues in this room are upskilling teachers across our networks of schools in relation to technology and digital strategy. But how often have we invested back in you, upskilling you about pedagogy? Now, 2023 is the year that changes, and that's going to start right now. So, every single one of us in this room works in education in some form or another. So every day, every action we take, we should be continually asking ourselves, how does what I'm doing now impact learning, right? And as Professor John Hattie says again and again, know thy impact. So thinking about impact, let's just have a look at some of the key post-pandemic EdTech research findings. Here's just 5. There's lots. Here's just 5. If you'd like a full academic literature review, and I'll happily give you a link at the end of the session. So first, there's a notable trend across EdTech research that teachers are consistently provoked to do something in relation to digital technology. Second, the while leaders and teachers generally agree now that integrating digital technology into learning is necessary somehow, use in our classrooms and our schools still remains highly variable. Fourth, we're seeing a tangible shift, aren't we, from the novelty of getting the laptops out to teaching and learning using EdTech, which develops greater kinds of metacognition. And we know from the Education Endowment Foundation research that adds an additional 7 or 8 months to student attainment outcomes. We know that it can make a massive impact. And finally, that global studies show that teacher EdTech confidence has doubled since before the pandemic. Now, that confidence is specific to particular kinds of uses, and it doesn't necessarily yet translate into meaningful learning experiences for our young people all the time, but the confidence is growing. We've got the ingredients there. Now, the thing is, most of this is not new news to any of us. The friction in conversations about EdTech today is largely the result of the irony that actually we're still talking about the same things that we were talking about 10, 20, 30 years ago. As Hegel famously said, the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. So what's going on here? Well, it's all about alignment. Academic, practitioner, and supplier research consistently tells us that digital technology makes an impact when it's underpinned by effective pedagogy. And you all have heard that theme permeate the sessions today in the conversations around pedagogy. And much like these stones, it's about moving from an assortment of great ideas, good intentions, brilliant innovation, to cohesion, clarity, and a clear vision about what we're really trying to achieve for our young people in 2023. It's about precision and alignment in everything we do and say around technology. Now let's just briefly unpack what we actually mean by pedagogy. And I normally teach this as a full master's module, so this is like a 3-minute short version, right? Now the word pedagogy was historically an academic term, and it's now been joyfully embraced by the evidence-informed teaching impression. That is fantastic. It's leading to far more purposeful conversations about meaningful classroom practice. However, there is a problem. Pedagogy is often used still as a relatively generic term, and it's often used to refer to things like theories of pedagogy, pedagogical beliefs and stances, pedagogical intentions and strategies, pedagogical approaches and methods, politicised pedagogy, curriculum and assessment, pedagogical practices. And actually this point isn't necessarily specific to technology. It applies to all kinds of aspects of our classroom practice, but that's a conversation for another workshop. Anyway, this lack of clarity means that conversations in our EdTech space, when we use the word pedagogy, tend to be quite wide-ranging and tend to be absolutely immersed in assumptions. And the key one being an assumption that we all mean the same thing when we don't necessarily do that. That leads to a lack of precision when we're identifying what exactly we need to do as educators next to improve teaching and learning. So allow me just to take you through just 3 really important definitions that really highlight what we're referring to specific to EdTech now and why this matters, why this makes such a big impact on learning. First one is this: pedagogical approaches, sometimes referred to as pedagogical methods. These are teaching strategies that we use in our classrooms. Retrieval practice, space learning, interleaving, cold calling, talk partners, all those kinds of things, including things wonderful John was mentioning earlier on. Now, this tends to be what practitioners refer to when using the word pedagogy. But please be aware that every pedagogical approach emerges from a particular theory of pedagogy. For example, retrieval practice stems from traditional pedagogies. Talk partners stems from social constructivism. Interleaving stems from individual constructionism. And collaboration stems from sociocultural theory. And that matters because each of us have individual pedagogical beliefs. Each of us individually have a set of values and beliefs about what we believe it means to be a learner and to learn, to be a teacher and to teach, how knowledge comes to exist and who is involved in that process, and what the role of schooling is in that bigger picture of education. And if we use pedagogical beliefs that align with or are built on our pedagogical beliefs, then those pedagogical approaches will be effective. But if they're not aligned, it's a bit like forgetting to put fuel in your car. The learning will slow down and eventually the engine stops working or falls apart. Now, 2 little interesting snapshots from the research in this space. The first is that pedagogical beliefs tend to determine which subject, phase, role or specialism we go into when we make choices about our employed roles. And second, that there will be a range of pedagogical belief systems coexisting in your school even when there is an agreed, adopted teaching and learning strategy in place. And all of that makes for a really fascinating conversation if you're seeking consistency or if you're thinking about organisational-wide change, but that's a conversation for another day. So finally, pedagogical practices. In other words, everyday specific actions, such as making eye contact, asking an open question, identifying a misconception, modelling a task. Think of it like this. I've got a little bit of bake-off inspiration here. Your pedagogical beliefs are your decision to make a chocolate cake rather than a lemon tart. You value sweet over sour. It's not right or wrong, it's what you believe and what you value. Your pedagogical approaches would be the recipe that you choose, the how to make that particular lemon tart. Anyone can follow the same recipe, right? And you'll get something that looks roughly like a lemon tart. Some chefs will be more consistent or better than others. Mine would look terrible. But despite all of this, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone wants to eat that lemon tart. That goes back to what you value. And your pedagogical practices are your mixing technique, what brand of flour you use, how accurate you are with your measurements and your timings. You might not be aware that they're choices that you're making, but those details will affect learning in very subtle ways. So you can see there's quite a lot of scope for different interpretations when we talk about pedagogy in an EdTech context. We're all busy people. We all take out of a conversation what we assume was meant, and we apply it in a way that's meaningful for us. And that is really, really important to recognise when we think about EdTech. Effective pedagogy doesn't necessarily mean something is good or bad. It just means it's working as intended. And those intentions come out of our belief systems. So if we want to be effective when we use EdTech, we need to be forensically precise about what it is we actually want to achieve and why. Why we think that's the right thing to do for our colleagues, for our learners. All of us, every single one of us, are what Professor Neil Selwyn calls pedagogical gatekeepers. Through our roles and our influences, we are either opening up or closing off choices that can be made by learners and educators in the moment of learning. And our pedagogical beliefs define what pedagogical approaches and practices become possible for teachers and become possible for learners. And they're embedded in our very communications and interactions every single day. And we're often completely unaware that this is happening. For example, the location of wireless determines whether learners can access support materials or marked work between lessons, something that research shows makes a massive impact on the rate of progress. Or that pivoting lessons around online knowledge resource hubs infers that knowledge creation is always done by someone else in another room and never by the people we are here with. Remember, please, that every decision in a school is ultimately a pedagogical decision. I'm just going to demonstrate this with some practical examples. I want you to close your eyes for a moment, please. It's like group therapy. And just think about one classroom teacher from your own childhood. We all have someone who jumps into our mind, either because they had a profoundly positive effect on us or because they gave us some element of trauma. Now, think about what it was that that teacher did or did not do that made you feel that way. Now think about today. As a teacher or a professional working in education, do you do that thing? I bet you either replicate it if you think it was a good thing, or you completely react against it if you think it was a negative thing. Which means that the embedded pedagogical beliefs that you have were initiated before you even thought about becoming a teacher, before you even thought about working in education. And more importantly, the pedagogical beliefs that are embedded within your own practice, whether you're aware of them or not, are sowing the seeds of an understanding for your students in 2023. Your beliefs are setting trajectories. That's quite profound, isn't it? Let's look at some concrete digital technology examples. I'm going to take you on a little tour of 4 parallel classrooms, all learning about the same topic and all using digital technology to make collaboration possible in learning. They're real examples. I'm in schools every week. That's where these are drawn from. So in other words, 4 versions of the same lesson underpinned by 4 different pedagogical belief systems. And I want you to take no notice of what technology they're using. I want you just to focus on the role of the group in relation to each individual learner's learning, what collaboration looks like, and what the teacher was doing before, during, and after these activities. And see if you recognise your own teaching approaches or those used by colleagues. You might want to note down which one you most align with. But note there is not a right or wrong to this. It's all based on your values and beliefs. So here we go. In classroom 1, learners had been set a task to answer some questions about a particular topic. They were using online resources like film clips, interactive images, specific websites and apps they'd been given access to via Google Workspace, and there's slides from the teaching input. And they were finding out the answers to these knowledge-based questions and talking about them with each other. Each student then answered the given questions using an auto-marked Google form. Now, I think there were 3 versions of that form with varying difficulty, and learners were assigned different forms depending on which one the teacher felt was most relevant for them. And the learners who completed the quiz first were rewarded with extra time to free search further information. And after that lesson, the teacher reviewed the marks and used the data to plan for the next lesson. That's classroom 1. Classroom 2, learners were working in groups of 4, defined by the teacher to ensure a gender and attainment mix. Each group had a Google Doc that had been sent to them as an assignment and with a number of sections in it. And the learner used the resources that were available in that Google Drive in order to find out specific information about the topic, and then they had to complete their section of the Google Doc, setting out their understanding. And at the end of the lesson, the teacher reviewed the Google Doc and used the insights in order to identify misconceptions and then plan for the next lesson. In classroom 3, learners are working in groups of 4 again, based on attainment from the last lesson. Each group had a blank Jamboard that had been sent to them, and they accessed the resources available in that Google Drive and worked through those, adding Jamboard stickies for each key point that they found out. And each learner had a different coloured sticky. Learners then reviewed the stickies from their peers and posed challenging questions to them, such as, what if, or why did that happen? Extending that peer's thinking into their zone of proximal development. And in classroom 4, learners were working in groups of 4 again. Each group had access to that Google Drive, and they explored the resources as a group before discussing how the topic related to their lives today, both within and outside of school. They captured those ideas, with each learner writing up a particular part of the conversation. They reviewed those findings together, and they identified who else they might want to draw into that conversation to connect their learning with real-life communities of practice, or communities of purpose, as we might call them now. Now, each of those 4 examples illustrated a different theory of pedagogy, as you can see on screen now in the blue bold text. And if we had more time, we'd unpack what's actually going on there in detail. There's a link on screen to a book which details this extensively. But anyway, I'm not saying that any of these were right or wrong, or any of them were better than any others, but that each is underpinned by a different value system. And it's that value system that's actually teaching young people about learning, because it makes them believe different things about themselves and about the process of learning. Think back to that childhood teacher. It's their values that you remember. Consciously, we teach what we know. Unconsciously, we teach who we are. Now, for reasons of time, I'm just going to skip ahead over a couple of examples because I just want to focus on something very specific. I want to touch on this in our uses of tools. Professor John Hattie, you'll probably be familiar with his visible learning research, found that if teachers and leaders are able to choose tools that help them to become the teacher or leader they want to be, then both the tool and the person becomes more effective. And that leads us to greater collective efficacy, which we know trebles the impact on student achievement. Now, just the last couple of minutes. About 18 months ago, I started using this word PedTech to emphasise this point. Historically, we've talked about EdTech, and we absolutely need to continue doing that. Technology gives us the what. EdTech gives us the how, the what that means in a teaching and learning context. They're important foundations that are absolutely vital for us to continue. But you will have noticed that when I shared examples today of using the technology, the quizzes, the device choices, the Jamboards, Google Workspace, all of that, I didn't actually talk about how the technology was being used. I was talking about why those features affected interactions between learners and learners, learners and teachers, learners and knowledge, learning and their communities. And that is why the word PedTech helps, because it reminds us to think about pedagogical beliefs first, about why we think particular approaches to using EdTech are important. It's a bit like that famous grammar book, eats, shoots and leaves, or eats, shoots and leaves. The emphasis is subtle, but it's an important one. And in 2023, we need to pay more attention to pedagogy, because that's what builds sustainability into both EdTech policy and practice and young people's lives and learning. That is why we are all here, isn't it? So my call to action to you today is this. What do you believe learning should mean in 2023? Be clear on this first, and then, and only then, look for the right technologies to support you. And when you're defining learning, what does that mean for our neurodiverse learners? For learners with special educational needs and disabilities? For learners who bring new forms of diversity, culture, language, creativity, identities, and challenge into our classrooms? What does that mean for learners who are already high attainers and aspire for more? What does that mean for learners who are struggling or who are overwhelmed or traumatized? Because they all matter, don't they? So how are we going to support them using the brilliant tools we have at our fingertips? Now, thanks to John and the LGfL, there are amazing colleagues in this room right now that can make that happen for you and with you. That can make learning more responsive, so things like formative assessment, responsive and adaptive teaching, more autonomous, where students are able to access relevant support and resources that are right for them, more inclusive for all students, more sensitive to cognitive load, more creative, more interactive, all of these wonderful things. And through the EdTech hubs, LGfL have given us a fantastic support system to give that support to you in a way that's meaningful for you and for the learners in your schools. And I urge you, I strongly urge you, to sign up and be part of this. And phenomenal teachers and leaders, many of whom are in the room with us today, have also shown incredible generosity in sharing examples of pedagogically led uses of digital technology in practice. And if you visit the PedTech portal, you'll find loads of short films that pair all this research that I've been inferring with practical, hands-on classroom activities. We've got Leo Academy Trust, Ribblesdale, High Furlong, Anson, Whitefield, many, many more. It's all free, it's a growing resource, it's there for you right now. So to close this session, I just want to state the obvious. The digital divide is no longer just about access to devices and connectivity. It's also now a direct reflection of the choices that all of us, every single one of us, make in our pedagogical gatekeeping, whether we realise it or not. And those choices are not just affecting our classrooms today, they're defining the very DNA of how the young people in our care see their learning and their lives ahead of them. And LGfL, this wonderful network of schools and partners and the phenomenal range of support available, is here to help you. So it's over to you. Let's do this together. Thank you.